A traditional legend from the Gothlands tells of the Palace of Bone. The earliest account predates the legends of the Winterman. For a long time people have assumed that the tales of the dark sorcerer who lives in the Palace of Bone was just folded into the legend of the Winterman when the legend of the Winterman was introduced, similar to the natural fusion and syncretism of legends and stories. After recent evidence, it seems that we may have it backwards. They didn't replace the Dark Sorcerer with the Winter Man. The Winter Man and the Dark Sorcerer are one and the same. So collecting the legend as completely as I can is paramount. While I have many different sources for this legend, my main source of information is the secondary source known as the Children's and Household Tales, written by Jacob and Willem Grimm. Even with diffusion of the legends throughout the ages, I believe we may have something useful here for the assault upon the Winterman's workshop. Far to the north, beyond even the forest, is the storm, an eternal storm that has always been there and will always be there. If you survive the capricious cyclones, blistering blizzards, and even the hellish hail, you will face many more threats that live and kill within the storm. You may find a village in the darkness, a village that stays warm and bright even during the darkest winter night. You will be tempted to stay, but you have to keep pushing further north. Even as you move further north, you will see the village many more times. The homes will look so warm and comfortable. The lights will follow you like lantern bugs, and you must not be tempted to go into the village. If you decide to give in to your temptations and head into the village, you will find that the village is empty of people. But every single house will have a roaring fire, hot meals, and plenty to drink. Even if you ignore my warnings and you make your way into the village, you must not be tempted to eat nor drink anything that is offered to you. There will be hot meals on the tables, the pantries will be full of sweets, and there will be plentiful drinks. Wines, spiced ciders, meads, and even decadent drinks reserved for kings and popes. You cannot eat anything offered to you, and you should not drink anything from the village, and you absolutely cannot sleep on any of the beds in the village. Only eat and drink what you bring, only sleep on the floor, and do not take anything from the house. And when you leave, be sure to thank the empty house as you leave. However, if you disregard what I tell you, there will be consequences. If you eat and drink in the village, you will see the other residents of the village. They will be friendly, they will be everywhere, and you will wonder why you haven't seen them before. If you didn't eat their food, you may notice that they have too many teeth, too many fingers, and their faces aren't quite right. Their ears pointed, their skin too smooth, their smile sharp, and their nails claw-like. Once they have you eating, they will have you drinking as well. You will not remember when you started drinking, and you will not ever stop. Your mug will never empty, and they will have you trying every drink in the village as your mind grows addled, and in time you will grow tired, and they will take you to the warmest bed in the entire village. A bed that is outside, soft, warm, and gray. They will bring you there, and they will warm your bed with coals, flames, and brambles. You will be too far gone to realize that you are lying on a bed of ash, and that the elves of the storm are cooking you. In their eyes, they provided you a feast, and it's only fair that you do the same. If you manage to make it further north than even the elf villages dare to go, you will make it to the freezing sea. Here it is so cold that even seawater freezes. You will see towering frozen waves taller than any tree, frozen beasts older than Adam, and jewels more precious than a king's ransom. It will not be worth the effort to break the ice to get to the jewels. They will glitter and gleam, but the ice that protects them is stronger than steel, and you do not wish to remain in the freezing sea for long. Hungry beasts stalk the freezing sea. There are bears far larger than any that live in the northern forest, with fur as white as snow, who will blend with the snow and ice, and who dig beneath it to build their homes. As fierce as these beasts are, they will leave you if you leave them alone. However, if you make it to the freezing sea, it isn't the bears you should fear, but the snowman. You will find a single snowman made by ancient snow, and you should avoid it at all costs. You will need to push further and further north, and don't rest, which is harder than it sounds. The summer days are so long that the sun doesn't set. The winter nights are so dark that the sun doesn't rise. It is so cold that you will feel like you are burning, and there will be nothing to eat and nothing to drink. If you eat the snow, you will freeze quicker, and you will get so little water that death will come for you quickly. If you fall, rest, or sleep, the snowman will catch up with you. He follows from a distance. You will never see him move, and you will never see who moves him, but he will reach you if you pause for too long. If you start a fire, burning whatever you can find, he will reach you even quicker. If you disregard my warning and you make camp in the freezing sea, you will wake up covered in snow. Snow so cold that your clothes won't warm you. You can only peek out through two small holes, and you can only move at a glacial pace, always seeking warmth and not able to be warmed by anything. The snow will be so thick that you can never peel it all off. It will refuse to be removed by you, and it won't ever melt. Now you are the snowman of the freezing sea, and you will have to find another to make your curse if you ever wish to be free. Making it further north than the freezing sea, you will find the Palace of Bone, built in a massive crater of ice. The Palace of Bone is massive, larger than a city, built by the bones of those the sorcerer and his students had killed. Throughout the millennia, the sorcerer has killed many, and even if you make it to the Palace of Bone, he may still kill you. If you make it to the front doors, he will let you in, and you can make your way past the workshops that dark creations are built, and he will take you to a place where you can choose treasure or wisdom. If you choose his treasure room, he will take you to his treasure room, where the gold will cause your flesh to fall off your bones, and your bones will guard the gold, your greed keeping your bones alive. If you choose wisdom, he will take you to his library. However, every book is blank, with not a single word written on any page. If you want some of the sorcerer's wisdom, it needs to be paid for in blood. You may start with your own blood as you smear it across the pages to see what is written on it, but you will always want more. Just another page, just another word of wisdom, just another drop of blood. However, you only have so much blood in your body, so you need to get blood from somewhere. The sorcerer will tell you how to get blood from others, and you will take from others to feed your growing need for wisdom. Your power will wax as your soul wanes, and you sacrifice others for your desire for power. Their bones building more to the Palace of Bone. Your shadow will fade, your ears will grow pointed, your teeth sharp and plentiful, and your fingers will grow claw-like, as you become some of the sorcerer's helpers, not dissimilar to the exiles who made the elfin villages. If you ever disobey the sorcerer, you may be fortunate, and he will kill you. If you are unfortunate, he will banish you to live with the other exiles. The wisdom stripped from your mind by force and liquor, living in the villages, searching for something you will never understand, and always seeking to keep others from reaching for the treasure you cannot have. If you decide to brave all of the dangers to reach the Palace of Bone for power, you may think of the dangers as challenges you will need to overcome to reach power. That isn't the purpose of the storm, the elves, and the snowman. Their purpose isn't to challenge you. Their purpose is to protect you from becoming like the sorcerer. The pile of bodies of those who failed to join the sorcerer is a far smaller pile than those that have been killed by the sorcerer's pursuit for power. This story is unusual for not having a character that was being followed the entire time. However, the warning seems to imply that dying is better than actually making it to the Palace of Bone. It does raise a few questions, since no one has actually survived a trip beyond the northern vortex. Who told this story in the beginning, and who are the people who survived the trip to the Palace of Bone? This follows the pattern of too many legends of the Necromancer. A common legend that is shared by many, but there's no physical evidence that they were there. We don't have recent eyewitness accounts because no one survives the trek beyond the northern vortex. Satellite imagery only sees clouds, so all we have here is a legend, and all I can do is hope that the information in it is accurate enough for our plans. It was Christmas Eve 2730 when I met the Winterman. The night was cold, and my mother was working the late night shift at the emergency room in Swamp City. She called me before bedtime and she told me she had to stay late because the nurse that was supposed to relieve her was presently in the emergency room having a cleaver removed from her rib cage. It did not help that the sun was already set, so it would be very unsafe for her to come home until the sun had risen. The snow made it hard to drive. Visibility was minimal even with the full moon, and that was before you had to deal with all of the wolves that stalked Swamp City at night. Murders are a daily occurrence, and the police didn't even bother investigating the murders that happened on the streets at night. It was just an assumed risk of traveling alone at night in the city. So she would have to leave during the morning, and as for my father, I didn't really know who he was, and my mother didn't know where he was. So I was alone on Christmas Eve. I had been alone at home before, but I still missed my mother. So I finished up the cookie and meat pies we were going to make for the Winterman, and I left them on a plate, along with a glass of sherry and some carrots for the reindeer. Most of my classmates celebrate Saturnalia or Hanukkah earlier in the month, and others celebrate Kwanzaa a little later in the month, but only a few of us specifically celebrated Christmas, and to the best of my knowledge, I was the only one who celebrated it on the 25th. Most who celebrated Christmas did so for 13 nights. So my family's traditions were very different than most. We made dessert and dinner, intending to be shared with the Winterman. My mother and I would bake cookies and shepherd pies to eat together, with a couple left on the plate for the Winterman. I would drink milk and she would drink sherry. The Winterman would be dressed in red and he would enter our house to leave gifts for good children, and for bad children, he would take them away from their parents. Every year, I stayed up late trying to catch the Winterman, but I always missed him as I fell asleep. But this year, I thought I was ready. Every year, I got presents from the Winterman, so I knew that I was a good kid. So as midnight approached, I sipped on my milk and nibbled on the oatmeal raisin cookies as I waited for the Winterman to enter our house. In old traditions, the Winterman would either get in either through the chimney or the front door. house was a single story with two bedrooms. It had no chimney, and all of the doors and windows were locked at all times. Still, my mother reassured me that the Winterman would get into our house through powerful magic that allowed him to visit every household on the planet in a single night. I listened carefully to the radio with the Winter Watch, constant radio updates on the location of the Winterman provided by the Imperial military. He started in Aetoria and made his way west through the Middle Kingdom, Basua, Mayquil, and Europa, a process that took him nearly all day as he traveled where night set and made his way west. Then he took a break, visiting Sealy, the Northern Forest, and then finally the Seven Cities, stopping first in Eden City, Imperial City, Isle City, River City, Cathedral City, and finally Swamp City. The disc jockey barely mentioned Swamp City when the power went out. The house was silent and dark. Not even a squeak could be heard. The moonlight barely trickled in through the closed blinds as I stayed still, barely breathing. The loss of power was frightening, but when I realized it was just a power outage, I took a deep breath and I let my heart slow down when I realized I heard something outside. I thought it was a car when I heard the sound of crunching snow outside and I could see lights flash outside. So I approached the window and I peered outside to see if it was my mother somehow, or if it was a car I recognized, or worse, a car I didn't recognize. What I saw outside was not a car nor a truck. It was a vehicle of a very different kind. It was a massive sleigh made of gold and red wood. There were 8 reindeer in 2 rows of 4, but they weren't like the kind we had seen in the city zoo. They were massive, over 3 meters tall with snow-white fur, blood-red eyes, and large red pointed antlers with light fuzz on them. Their harnesses were also made of red wood, and unlike the ropes of cartoons and storybooks, they were connected to the sleigh by large, heavy chains of rust and iron. The front of the sleigh had 2 different lanterns on the front of it, lighting both the sleigh and the land just in front of the sleigh. The seats themselves were red and soft-looking with a large back seat that had 2 separate burlap sacks. But what interested me the most was the sleigh driver. Winterman was an old man, like I expected, and he was heavy-set with a large white beard. His coat and hat were red-lined with white fur, with big black leather boots, and I could see he wore black leather beneath the red jacket. He carried a large white cane with 2 golden jewels on top of the cane, which resembled eyes in a skull. And around his neck was a leather necklace with a bird's skull. The Winterman grabbed an empty burlap sack as he headed to the door. I watched eagerly as the Winterman approached the door. He wasn't exactly the way I thought he would have looked, but sometimes children's stories drew things differently. Horses, dogs, and birds don't look the exact same way they do in the stories, but you could still recognize it, and I could still recognize the Winterman as he approached the door and he knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. I approached the door about to open it when I stopped. Mom always told me to never open the door for anyone except her, that letting strangers into the house would not be allowed without her permission. Except this is the Winterman. Surely she would give permission to let him in if I could call her, wouldn't she? Knock, knock, knock. My hands were resting on the doorknob, about to flip over the lock when, while I was overthinking about what to do or not to do, my mom made me promise not to let anyone else in. She was clear about it. Even for her friends, she didn't want me letting them in without her in the house, and she wouldn't have me let in my own friends without her there. So even with the Winterman outside, she wouldn't want me to let him in. Knock, knock, knock. I removed my hand from the knob, the lock still in place. I might make the Winterman upset, but I wasn't going to be letting him in without Mom there. If the Winterman couldn't get inside of the house without letting him in, he could leave his presents outside and we could get to them tomorrow morning. I stepped back and there was silence behind the door. Step, step, step. I was far away from the door when I felt a gloved leather hand drop on my right shoulder as the Winterman spoke. Oh, oh, oh. What a loyal child listening to their mother. Such a nice child. So I will be sure to get you a very special gift, the Winterman said as I pulled away and I could see him up close. His face was heavily wrinkled, but I could tell that he was smiling underneath his beard. He opened his seemingly empty burlap sack as he reached in, and he pulled out a very large box that he laid underneath the tree, one with no name on it. And he also pulled out a single wrapped envelope that had a torch stamp on it, as it was addressed to just the name Mom that he put on the branches of the tree. Is that box for me? I asked the Winterman, who nodded. Ho, ho, ho. It is. All I need is your name, and I will write it on the box. But that isn't your big gift, he said warmly, and I eagerly gave him my name as he pulled out a scroll from his coat and he removed his glove and he wrote on the list with his index finger, like there was ink on his fingertip, although I don't know why it was red. Then my name appeared in a golden cursive script on the box. I smiled as I asked the Winterman, "What is my big gift?" I asked the Winterman as he pointed towards the front door, which was now open, and I could see the sleigh outside. Despite the door being open, the living room wasn't cold at all, and the Winterman spoke. You get to visit my workshop, beyond the northern vortex, he said, and I was excited, but then I realized I would need to be back for Christmas. Will I be back in time for Christmas? I asked the Winterman, who laughed and nodded. Ho, ho, ho. I promise. I'll bring you back in time for Christmas, he said as he held my hand and led me to his sleigh. I thought about refusing for a moment, but I knew I had to trust the Winterman. All the stories told me about his workshop beyond the northern vortex, a place full of wondrous elves, fae, ponte, and mystical beings that would make the fae of Hypenaria and the yokai of Nippon look mundane in comparison. There was even a story, one of my favorites, about riding in the sleigh with the Winterman, and you could spend years in the workshop and return at the same night. And since the Winterman was real, clearly he was the same legendary figure in the stories, even if he didn't look exactly like his pictures. I eagerly followed the Winterman, holding his gloved hand as we walked outside the door, both shutting and locking it behind us. Despite the snow, it did not feel cold to me at all, and as we walked to the sleigh, I only noticed one pair of footprints behind us as we made our way to the sleigh, which also had no tracks behind it. He picked me up and placed me in the sleigh, carefully buckling me in as he took his seat, and I looked out over the footprints, only his own footprints visible in the snow. "Onward!" he yelled to his reindeer as they charged forward through the snow. The wind and snow pushed past me, but I couldn't feel the wind on my skin. I could see it push my pajamas and push back my hair, but I couldn't feel the cold. I assumed it was part of the magic as I watched the sleigh pull us through the streets of Swamp City. Even at midnight, there were parked cars on the streets. I could hear the crunch of both snow and broken glass beneath the sleigh's skis, and I could see red snow, yellow snow, and even black snow as we breezed past the mall. No one was visible on the streets as we pushed further north. The lights were a cold yellow as we pushed past them, and when we left the streets of Swamp City, we made it to Star Swamp proper. The swamp was silent, no frogs, no birds, no calls, not even the splash of water, as the sleigh pulled us over the snow and frozen water. Somehow, the Winterman was able to find every single way through without having to turn or even slow down, as we went even faster as the trees became a blur of green, brown, and blue. We pushed through the winter storm, and the world became foggy as the air finally felt cold. We made it to the northern vortex, the permanent storm to the far north, rivaled only by the southern vortex on the other side of the planet. Both storms were so dangerous that few had ever survived either vortex at sea, and none had ever survived the journey on land. As together, both storms kept a third of the planet hidden from human exploration. I felt a chill roll up my spine as I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep warm. The Winter Man was focused on his journey the entire time as he kept pushing forward through the freezing fog that only grew thicker and thicker. Soon I couldn't see the reindeer in front of me, and then I couldn't see the sleigh itself. All I could see was the gray and the dim glow of the lanterns as I heard the rattle of chains and the hoofbeats of reindeer. I don't know how long this continued, but it felt like it was years until suddenly the fog was gone. I could see for kilometers, and I could see a vast tundra of ice and snow. The sky above was full of stars, far more than I had ever seen before in my life. The moon was full and bright. Luna's light was unfiltered by city smog and untouched by corruption. And finally, there was the northern lights themselves. Green waves in the sky which twisted, bounced, and danced across the sky in an eternal show unseen by human eyes. We were beyond the northern vortex, and we had actually made it to the tundra beyond. There were a few places in the northern forest that the northern lights could be seen, but it was so rare and so very dangerous. Anyone who had tried to make it this far north before had never returned. The only reason we knew that there was ice and tundra this far north was because of pictures taken from space. And now here I was at one of the most remote places on the planet, a place so far that no one had ever made it here before. A place so remote that it was said only Dragon walked these frozen wastes, and it was one of the most beautiful places I had ever seen. The ice sparkled like diamonds, and the stars twinkled like never-ending Christmas ornaments, and even the northern lights added to the awe as I looked above, seeing dragons, waves, and swirls in the lights above. Not sure if it was my mind projecting a pattern onto the lights, or if they indeed form these shapes just for me. We're almost there. Winterman said for the first time on our trip. I was so caught up in the awe of the northern vortex that I forgot that I was here to see the Winterman's workshop. I locked my eyes forward to see if I could spot the workshop before we got there. What I saw before anything else was the smoke, long before I saw any of the buildings or the lights. At first, it was like a smudge on the horizon. I thought it was a stray cloud or even a wisp of fog, but as we got closer, I could see it was a large black cloud of smoke. As we got even closer, I could see the smokestacks producing that smoke. Clearly, their filters had not been changed in a very long time. The smokestacks were once white, but they were covered in black soot and pollution. I remembered learning from class that when you burn something like coal with too little oxygen, it causes the smoke to burn black with small coal particles, and it could greatly increase pollution. So most factories had air scrubbers, filters, and other means to make it cleaner, but it didn't stop all of the polluted air. These factories clearly didn't even care about lip service of air quality with how black the smoke was burning. And the factories themselves were massive gray brutalist buildings with no windows and only a few dim lights on the outside, made up of cylinders built on top of cylinders, or different factories connected to other factories via sky bridges built of soot-coated concrete. This was not what I imagined the Winterman's workshop would look like. I imagined a small cottage made out of gingerbread or maybe ice, where he would have one room for sleeping and one room for working, where he built all of the toys for everyone. Although, I guess, many factories made sense, toy companies had to build massive infrastructure just to build a lot of one toy, and he had to produce unique toys for every child on the planet. He drove his sleigh between factories and underneath the sky bridges, and I could only watch in horror as I saw that the snow and ice was coated in so much soot and coal that it was as black as asphalt, and the sky was permanently grayed out with no moon, no stars, no sun, and no lights. The very beautiful jewels that made the northern vortex such a beautiful place were blocked out by the smoke of the Winterman's industry. And it was only the beginning. In the center of all of the factories, like the hub of a giant wheel, I could see the Winterman's home. This was beautiful, but beautiful in the way that blood was beautiful around Feralia. The palace in the center gleamed pure white among the black snow and soot falling from the sky, untouched by the impurities of the world. The clouds above parted above the palace, allowing moonlight to gleam and fall upon the palace, showing me in all of its glory what the Winterman's home truly was. There was a few old stories, very old stories, from Gothia Civitas that said that the Winterman's home wasn't made of gingerbread, but it was made from the bones of those who disobeyed him, and it was held in place by the near unbreakable ice of the north. And it turned out those stories were true, but they did not give justice to the Palace of Bone. The palace was tall, the central dome stood taller than the Morado Palace in Imperial City. Not just a little, but the Morado Palace could have been one of the smaller domes butting outside the Palace of Bone, and it would have been lost. 6 smaller domes sprouted off the central dome, and all 7 of the domes had massive white towers made from billions of interlocking bones. The towers were so high that they towered further up than I could see, and far above the smoke clouds above. What is this place? I asked the winter man, who chuckled. Ho, ho, home, he said as the sleigh was pulled into the front entrance, and I could see that the inside was just as haunting as the outside. Every bone sealed together like pieces of a puzzle, ice holding them all together, and every few meters I could see the top half of a skull. Skulls that had dim lights inside of their sockets, like eyes made from candle flames, that followed us as we made it to the center of the Palace of Bone. Despite its massive size, we made it there in mere moments. There, I saw the Winterman's personal workshop. The Palace of Bone, while unexpected, was at least something that I was familiar with. The Winterman's true workshop was something that I couldn't dream up in my worst nightmares. There were endless hooks and chains hanging from the ceiling. From those hooks hung dolls, tin parts, bone, flesh, and even whole human bodies. Bodies that no longer bled, but still struggled. On his tables were many projects in varying degrees of completion. I saw autopsy tables where every organ was removed, and the skin was clipped open, and yet the body still moved. The head gasping, unable to scream without lungs, but still it tried to scream from the pain it was in. I saw creations of tin, flesh, and wood, all merged into one. Wooden soldiers with human eyes whose breath fogged the air, and like my own breath. I saw tin dolls with hair of shredded skin, and whose joints were made from bone. I saw infant skeletons coated in resin and plastic, where the first stages were barely coated in the material, while those at the far end were lifelike baby dolls. Dolls with human skeletons inside of them. In the Winterman's workshop, he would replace every part of a person to build something monstrous, and he would take those removed parts to add them to a different monster. Not all of his creations were toys nor toy-like. I saw a hunched-back being that expanded and contracted like it was breathing, but it had no head, and only a single panic-filled eye on its chest as it moved scraps from one table to another. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I could not move my mouth, let alone my body, as the Winterman chuckled, his laugh no longer reassuring to me, as he left the sleigh, and I joined him. You are no longer your own. You are mine. You gave me your name, and I took your bones, replacing them with ice from the northern vortex. Ice that I control. You can only obey me, and if you try to disobey. There was silence for a moment before I felt the worst pain in my life so far. Every bone in my body sharpened and froze. Breathing hurt, thinking hurt worse, and all I could do was stand there, unable to move, just taking the pain. My head glanced down to my left hand as I saw ice growing out of my hand. Ice grew out of my fingertips before growing sharper and longer as icicles broke the skin around every joint, as ice grew out of the blood, freezing, so I couldn't even bleed. I couldn't even scream as the ice stopped growing, and the pain eased some, but it did not retreat and it did not melt. That is your first lesson. You will endure, you will serve. I need a new assistant. Now grab me a bone saw. I need help opening a chest cavity, he said as I stalked away, fresh pain blossoming with every step as I walked towards his tool table. And I had my first long night with the Winterman. The frozen bones sticking out of my skin never thawed and never melted. I had to break them off, and they hurt every bit as breaking your own bones. But no matter how much it hurt, I couldn't scream. I learned over time that while I could not disobey the Winter Man, I could still make my own choices, as long as they didn't disobey him, hurt him, nor his work. I think it was a conditioning of his, getting us to learn to obey him willingly, so he didn't expend so much energy forcing us to work for him. And I do mean us. I was not his only assistant, and I was not his only worker. It was rare to see someone working from the factory, but they were bruised, tired, and always coughing up a storm. Always suffering, but never dying. Oh no. Death was a rare luxury only gifted by the Winterman himself. Instead, he would trap a soul to flesh, bone, or an object, and every one of us would serve a purpose. Some of us built for him, others served him, and others left the northern vortex to do his work in the world beyond. Those who left the northern vortex had no mind left, and didn't even try to live anymore, having been broken a long time ago. And as harsh as life was in the northern vortex, I learned that it was a lot worse than I initially thought. The nights in the Palace of Bone were long. Sometimes he would focus on a task for so long that it felt like weeks had passed before the Winterman finally rested, giving us our rest too, although it wasn't rest as in sleep. That luxury was even scarcer than death in this frozen hell. We would just stop moving, toys put away on the shelf until he had purpose for us again. Sometimes he would play with us for months, taking us apart over and over, having us build things, break things, and do things for him, not allowing us any rest, and still that was better than having him get bored of us. Sometimes he would put us away for weeks at a time, unable to move, as the ice gradually overtook our bodies from the low temperatures of the northern vortex. So, when we did move, we had to break out of the ice. If the ice overtook too much of us, he wouldn't bother breaking us out of the ice. He could always get more toys elsewhere, and those trapped in the ice would be there forever, never sleeping, never dreaming, never dying, always feeling the agony of the ice, watching the world around you change, while you stay the same, praying and hoping that something that crawls by will take enough pity on you to make eye contact with you. And if you're free, you try to avoid making eye contact with those that are frozen. If you don't, then it reminds you of your own inevitable pain, and that was not our worst torture. If he stayed good, he stayed free of the ice, but some misery was shared by all. Plants don't grow this far north. He doesn't seek food from beyond the vortex, and the only meat in the Palace of Bone was from those that were living in it. I tried to resist eating them. They still lived, they still moved, but the hunger only grew worse. I couldn't starve to death, but I could grow weaker from hunger. I would fail his requests more and more, as my body wasn't strong enough to move tools around. But when I failed, he made my bones of ice grow and overtake my flesh. At one point, over half of my body was coated in ice that ached, stung, and burned, even as it chipped and tapped off other items. I tried eating ice, but it only made my hunger worse, and in time, I had to eat flesh from the Winterman's workshop. The first time I ate human flesh was the half-rotten offal that the Winterman had dumped from a corpse that was hung from its hands by hooks of iron. Even with the organs removed, the eye still fluttered, but it stopped trying to scream a long time ago. I could smell decay and suffering on the offal, but I was too hungry to care as I crawled on the ground, the ice around my mouth having to be ripped away to allow me to eat. The pain of my skin being pulled away, along with the ice, was almost as bad as the feeling of ripping the ice from my body. I crawled on the ground, grabbing at the offal with my greedy, dirty hands, as I shoved the meat into my dry, cold mouth, forcing swallow after painful swallow of the meat, as the pain of hunger began to fade, and I realized the Winterman was watching me. And he was laughing at my humiliation and pain as I ate the rotten flesh. The next time I ate flesh, it was fresher, and the time after, it was even fresher. Eventually, I stopped caring where the flesh came from, oftentimes simply biting the flesh off of the Winterman's subjects, with the flesh still warm and living. I didn't care at that point. I was hungry, and I had learned that any sense of morality in me died with my past, before the ice. I don't know how long I lived as the Winterman's assistant. My mind no longer cared before I heard whispers for some of the newcomers. They told of a way to send a message by letter to anyone in the world by requesting that Vanth carry the letter to them, that it had a torch stamp on it. So I took a rare pen and paper and wrote this story on it, hoping that Vanth would deliver it to my mother. If you get this message, please know that the Winterman is a necromancer, and that he has taken me. I don't know how much of myself is left to give before I lose every trace of my humanity. I know that my body has changed. The growth of ice has caused my flesh to warp around it. Experiments done on me by the Winterman has changed me even further, and that is before all of the times my flesh was taken to feed someone else or myself. And that is just my physical body. My mind, I fear, will be too far gone soon. There's years I go without a single thought other than pain and obedience. I don't know how long I've been here, but I've forgotten what the sun looks like. I know that time can break anyone, and time has already broken me. I am just hoping there's enough of me to send my love to my mother. I wish I could sign this letter with my name, however, I don't remember it. I haven't remembered it since I gave it to the Winterman. Just know that this letter is sent with love by your only son. Love, your son. Samantha William returned from her double shift at the hospital, expecting to find her son asleep on the couch. She had special gifts supposedly given by the Winterman, but when she made it home, she couldn't find her son. All she found was a trail of footsteps leading from her locked house that stopped on the street. She called the police and even the Vigiles Urbani. They found no trace of her son that day until the afternoon, when an officer had the idea to open the gifts under the tree that Samantha did not remember wrapping. The wrapped envelope labeled "Mom" contained the letter above, supposedly written by her son. However, the police do not believe that it was accurate at all because of what was found in the box underneath the tree. It was the complete skeleton of Samantha's son. Blood stains still on the bones, but otherwise no tissue on the bones. Dental records matched young Jack Williams, and the DNA was a partial match for Samantha, proving it was her son. The killer was never found, but other reports around the world of the supposed "good saint killer" have been reported, but nothing conclusively has been proven. Samantha still believes that her son is out there somewhere and has spent the last 50 years trying to find someone who can bring her son back. When she heard of my project, she reached out to me personally, and I thank her immensely for her help. And for the first time in 50 years, she has hope that her son may be back home for Christmas. I try not to put myself in the stories. Some stories require me to be a part of it because I am there and it is in the place that the storyteller is part of the story that I lay my trap. For the 12th night, I have my friends over. We had spent weeks planning this party, and it is going to be a fun one. We have set up the tree outside with fairy lights and ornaments. Each one of them is decorated by a guest, with Marceline's painted ornaments taking up a lot of space on the tree. There are even some ornaments hanging around on the inside. There are boxes outside, but they're purely decorative with the gift boxes indoors. Everyone has brought a gift for everyone else, and there are a lot of different foods and drinks. Adance's lumpia is quite popular, as is Marceline's gumbo. One of my sisters brought seafood, another made bread, and one made cheesecake. Although the most popular food item is my mother's mashed potatoes. The feasting happens all day, and there is so much joy and excitement in everyone's tone. Until the sun went down. When the night arrives, I reluctantly say goodbye to my sisters and my mother as they head home, and I promise them that I will try to see them the next day. They know that I will do my best, but we all know that best effort is not the same thing as guaranteeing it will happen. Now it is just me, myself, Adance, Marceline, Ava, and Fallen Grace left in the house. Now our traditions look very different as we play loud music and we place out a glass of sherry and cookies out for our nocturnal visitor. We sing along with the songs, careful to only use sign language to communicate, even as our words say something else. To anyone who listens to us, it looks like we are talking about cookies and gifts tomorrow. To someone who watches us signing, they will see we are talking about something very different. Adance is the only child among us, but she is not the same Adance as the Marquess of Madness. She is only a girl among us. Alice before Wonderland, the match girl stuck in the snow, a Baggins in Bag End. She had so much fun feasting with us. She had fun with her aunts and even getting to see her grandmother, who she likes to call Dragon. When the night was done and my family went home, I spent my last few waking hours with Adance and my friends. I had seen Adance many times across the years, when I visited the pumpkin house, when we left home for the first time, when I interviewed her for stories, when I met her father, and when she told me about her past and her future and the role I play in both. Although that is a story for another time, if I do survive this night. This Adance was from before she found Lockhart, when she was just a young girl exploring Mount Toba, 75,000 years ago. still dressed in saber fur, and who loved seeing the rabbits hopping around the house, and who hugged every stuffed animal there was. She had spent most of her night painting with her dragon and baking for the first time in her life. Her eyes lit up when she ate bread and cookies. She made a big mess in both the studio and the kitchen, but no one was upset at her. It was just good to see her happy again. Although we did have to keep Ava separated because even knowing that this Adonse wasn't the same Adonse that Ava once knew, the feelings are still raw and she deserved peace on this night too. So fortunately her girlfriend Fallen Grace kept her company and acted as a mediator. Still, all too soon, Adonse grew tired and we had her set out the cookies and sherry for the Winterman, and she was tucked in, and a kiss was laid on her head as we left the living room she was resting in. The fireplace was still burning, but the fire was dying as we approached to midnight. I went to the drawing room with my friends, and we continued talking in low tones so she could hear our voices as she is comforted to sleep, and we have set out our trap. Red Prince sits to my right with her jacket ready, and she sips on hot chocolate while we wait to hear the rattle of chains and the crunch of snow. Fallen Grace is holding Ava close and they chat quietly. Their conversation meant only for themselves, but they seemed happiest that way. Then there was me, my hand shaking as I sip at the rare mug of coffee. I rarely touch both coffee and alcohol, but on this night I decided to allow the exception for coffee as I try to ease my nerves. I keep telling myself that Adonse will be safe, and she will always be safe. Except in my heart, I know that isn't necessarily true. And finally, there was myself. Or maybe not myself? Close enough. Across from me is a near identical version of myself, with the same long hair, same face mask with pink flowers, and even the same mug of coffee. Although that version of myself had golden eyes behind their glasses, and they weren't from here. From what I knew from the story they told me, they were a different me from a different world, a world without seven cities, a frightening world where it feels like honor is punished and where they only have their mother and no one else. They got trapped in elsewhere and they're trying to find their way home. They have traveled to many different places, but they still haven't found their way home, even though their mother is still looking for them. Although calling them myself will get confusing, so I think I will just call them Daya. They came to help set at this trap because even though they're from a different place, we are still family, and they wanted to be welcome in a home this year. They got to spend time with sisters they never had, and they got to spend time with a different version of their mother, and of course, they got to spend time with the Danse. In the last few minutes before midnight, there is silence as we wait for midnight to arrive. This trap is very careful, but has to be very deliberate. He has spent thousands of years avoiding being captured, and he has avoided powerful deities and near omnipotent monsters. So he was prepared against them. So our trap had to be set by people too insignificant for him to notice, like an exoteric human, two esoteric women, one extraordinary fairy, a worn wanderer, and a journalist. Insignificant, lowly beings that were something too negligible for the necromancer to notice, or another term that we shared among ourselves, heroes. When midnight arrives, the power fades and turns off as we hear the sound of chains outside the house. Red puts on her glasses and Falling Grace flies into the darkness holding her girlfriend. Dia slides into the darkness, the role taking a lot of focus, but would take them elsewhere. Now it was my place, as I opened the door and I stepped outside to meet the Winterman, while everyone got into position. Hello! Oh, you must be the Winterman, I say to the man in the red coat. as I finally saw the Necromancer in person for the first time ever. He stood taller than I expected, and most of his face was covered by his white beard, and I could see he wore a bird's skull on his nether necklace, and that he did indeed carry a staff made of bone. At a glance, it looked like a white staff with glowing golden jewels on the top. Whether it was a glamour or just human nature that hid its true nature, I am not sure, but still I could see the individual bones on the staff. I could see the bones because I was expecting to see them. They were crudely held together by sinew that was thousands of years old, and the cranium that capped the staff had two golden eyes in the sockets that still glowed even after all of these years. A staff that was made from the bones of a goddess, and the eyes that were stolen from demigod twins. The bones made him immune to the wrath of the gods, and the eyes made the gods blind to him. Even time was blind to him. Despite knowing all of this, I kept a wide smile on my face, and I approached the vile man with no hesitation and no fear, keeping my feelings of revulsion and disgust to myself as I approached him. For this to work, I would have to be the one who came outside to meet him. As I approached, I saw him squint his eyes behind his glasses as he examined me. I had no weapons, I had no power. I was an exoteric human. I didn't possess esoteric energy, and I clearly didn't know who he was because what kind of crazy person would willingly approach the necromancer if they knew who he was? I approached him and I extended out my left hand to shake his gloved hand. He took my hand, switching his staff from the left hand to the right hand. His sleigh was carved from a single piece of redwood. The wood was smooth and the inside of the sleigh was lined with fur on the floor, but the seats were leather, with straps also made of leather. The back seat had two large but empty burlap sacks that looked out of place for the luxury of the sleigh. There was gold filigree in the wood, and it even plated the skis. There were lanterns on the front, but they weren't lit, since even though the night was cold in National City, it doesn't snow here, although the sleigh always arrives with the sound of crunching snow. The reindeer were massive and very different from the necromancer's sleigh. Their fur was white as the snow, and they all possessed slightly red antlers, with eyes that were also red. Again, at a glance, you would think they were large and albino reindeer, but are otherwise normal creatures. Up close to them, you can see that they are suffering. Just beneath the fur, patches of skin are bruised and bloody. Their mouths are muzzled, and the muzzles have been on there so long the skin is starting to grow over it, and the releases are permanently rusted shut. They stand on legs that are broken, with bone peeking through broken skin. And the important part about all of this is to pretend I didn't notice any of the odd things, and instead play the role of an excited and starstruck parent enthralled by the appearance of the Winterman, one he has seen many times and one he isn't afraid of. "Let me help you into my house. My daughter will be so excited to see you," I tell the necromancer as I help him out of his sleigh, not giving him a chance to switch his staff back to his left hand. And sure enough, he limps out of the sleigh, adjusting to his new hand position. "Oh, ho, ho! Let's meet the young lady," the Winterman said, as he grabbed a burlap sack with his left hand, and he limped towards the door just behind me. This moment is so delicate it needs to happen perfectly, and if it fails, we may not live long enough to try for a second chance. I open the door and I touch the iron key hanging on my door frame, and then I step inside of the dark house. Only the dim embers of the fireplace lit the room, but you could see someone lying on the couch underneath the blanket. I stepped inside and stood aside, giving the winter man room to enter. as he crossed the threshold and he lost his footing, falling down and losing his grip on his walking stick as it went flying through the hallway and into the living room, less than 2 meters from the fireplace. It was a quick action, a carefully deliberated accident where an ancient legend collides with an old superstition. A story so old that most of the modern world has forgotten, but to someone as ancient as the Necromancer, it is too modern for him to have ever heard of. Sometimes evil just falters and falls when it crosses your doorway, and when you're gripping your staff in a hand you're not used to holding it in, it's very easy to lose your grip when you fall. It separates the Necromancer from his staff. While he certainly doesn't hold it all of the time, he wasn't expecting to be separated from it at this time, and it left him vulnerable. For the first time in over a century, the gods could see him again, and for the first time in tens of thousands of years, he was vulnerable to the gods of Altis. There was a chill as a frigid breeze shut the door behind him, and he struggled to his feet. "I can get the staff for you," I said as I stepped to where the staff was in the near-complete darkness. The Necromancer had his doubts by now, but he was not immediately hostile as he heard me step away, and I grabbed his staff. The bones weren't smooth. They were rough and they were dry. The eyes in the skull stared at me as I held the skull up to my face, and I could hear the Necromancer clear his throat. "My staff, please," he said in a voice that said he didn't expect to be disobeyed. I glanced up to where he was on the other side of the living room, and I lifted the staff up as Dia stepped forward from the shadows. Identical to me, and in the dark their eye color was hidden as they grabbed the staff and stepped back into the darkness, taking the staff from the Necromancer and taking it elsewhere. The web was spun, and now the Necromancer knew that there was a problem. Staff gone, he was now all in one place, unable to slip through time and shadow to vanish. He was physically trapped here, and the power of the staff could not be used by him, but that did not make him helpless by any means. "You tricked me. I will have your head," he said as he reached into his burlap sack to pull out a very large blade. A sword so large he had to use 2 hands to swing it towards me, only for me to stand still as the sword approached me, and I had to stay still. The Necromancer was ancient and powerful. He didn't see threats from anyone who didn't have power, and when he did see you as a threat, he got tunnel vision. He didn't notice the markings of salt on the floor, nor the sigils of silver hanging from the walls, nor, most ominously, the mistletoe with white berries on the plate of cookies. He stepped forward into the salt where his skin sizzled and he screamed as he fell forward, dropping his sword beyond the salt. While salt could stop many dangerous things, the layers of immortality and contracts on the Necromancer's body and soul left him practically unkillable. However, unkillable did not mean the same thing as invulnerable, as the flames burned his coat away, revealing his tattoos beneath his coat. Tattoos of serpents, chains, screaming faces, and lots that still moved and squirmed beneath his skin. The flames dancing across his skin burned it, only for it to be healed in less than a second. But the pain and surprise was enough for him to fall to his hands and knees, and for Fallen Grace to fly from the shadows, as she grabbed the leather necklace from around his neck, and she flew forward. Even in pain, he reached forward, trying to grab the bird's skull, as Fallen Grace flew it into the dying light of the fireplace. The necklace caught fire easily in the weak fire, as the fire burned from a weak red to a bright blue nearly instantly. The flames of the demiurge burned the unholy locust, the fire from LCL eager to have something that could be burned. The necromancer, ever stuck into his tunnel vision, crawled towards the blue and white flames as he reached into the fire, only to withdraw his right hand, now burned down to the bone that fell to the floor, bursting into ash in a moment. A wound that he did not start healing from. The locust increased his power and gave him the means to possess others if they put on the necklace. Normally, it is nearly impossible to destroy, but its unholy nature was like an extremely powerful acid. But what happens to an acid when you pour it into a high pH base? You neutralize it. His objects of power gone, he reached into his sack again, only to find that there was nothing inside of it. The sigils of silver around the room glowed lightly. They sealed away any access to the paths, so the items that the bags led to were still where they came from, but they weren't stored in the bags. They were stored somewhere else entirely, with just the bags acting as a way to connect to his stockpile in the Palace of Bone. Even though the sigils sealed the paths off, they did not stop the necromancer from accessing help that he carried with himself in a more traditional summoning. He grabbed some of his blood from his right stump as he drew a sigil on the ground, not one meant to call something forth, but one to act as a key for a lock that was already on the necromancer's body. In modern terms, he was blocked from accessing the internet, but he wasn't blocked from accessing anything he already downloaded. One of his tattoos, on his right arm, which resembled a lock held together by both chains and snakes, opened, and from the sigil rose a bloody figure, hunched over, about the size of a rabid raccoon. The creature's organs were exposed, and it was eyeless, with only smooth flesh covering its eyes. The hands were more claw-like, however, it didn't growl, it didn't howl, it cried like a newborn infant. Around the creature's neck was a long chain connecting it to the Winterman's flesh. And this was why I was essential to this fight. The necromancer had many different minions he could call upon, and my friends needed someone who could quickly identify whatever was being summoned before it had a chance to attack. The exposed organs, sharp claws, and even the infant-like cries were a clue to the creature's identity. One of Bathory's children, the Poronets. While the creature adjusted to being alive again, I grabbed an ornament from the indoor tree, and I threw it at the creature, which wailed again in that eerie cry as it clutched at the ornament and refused to move, even as the necromancer pulled on its chain. Poronets are very aggressive creatures. However, they recognize their mother's crest on the ornament. So now the monster did not dare harm me nor anyone in my household. Their love for their mother was far greater than their bloodlust. Now, very angry, the necromancer gathered more of his blood and threw it in 3 different places. More locks unlocked on his skin as his blood now smoked and sizzled. And from the smoke rose 3 different figures with moss coating their legs, and they all held long-handled axes with a single hand, and I could hear them whistling. "Forest fiends!" I yelled out, and the dying flames of the fireplace relit with flames burning bright and red as the fiends retreated from the flames. The fire was lit by the Red Prince, who was still unseen by the Winterman, as in desperation he opened the last lock on his body. A lock held over his heart as he bled from both his mouth and eyes as he summoned his final creature. It crawled out of the blood like it was a tunnel, and I could see the revenant that rose from the blood. He still looked somewhat human. He was covered in scratches and cuts, but they had partially healed over and sealed over. His hair was long, tangled, and full of scabs. His clothes looked like something from the end of the Great War, and around his neck was an old-fashioned pair of headphones, and he gurgled as he spoke a single word. he whispered as the necromancer grabbed him by his hair, pulling him back as the revenant tried to seal his mouth shut. "Revenant!" I yelled out into the darkness as Ava ran out of the hallway to break the Winterman's arm as she freed the revenant from the grasp, and she pressed his head into the fire. The revenant did not struggle. He accepted his immolation as the fires burned away his vocal cords and in time would burn away his brain, freeing him from his curse. "Rest well, Robert. We couldn't have done it without you," I said as I turned to the necromancer. "Now down a hand." His other arm broken, unable to access his bag of tricks, out of allies, and out of options. "Surrender, Winterman. You have nothing else," I told him as he stared defiantly up at me. "I am not out of tricks yet," he said, his bloodshot eyes staring up at me as he bit his tongue and he spat his blood towards me. I dodged out of the way quickly enough as it splattered behind me. "That's enough. It's over," I said as I grabbed the mistletoe and stabbed the twig into his stump, as the Winterman let out a final howl and he collapsed on the floor. I should probably explain. The Necromancer had many different forms of protection and immortality, one of which was based on the story of Balder, who was protected from fire and water, iron and all metals, stone and earth, from trees, sickness and poisons, and from all four-footed beasts, birds, and creeping things. Although he was still vulnerable to mistletoe, which was not any of those things. So even though the Winterman still lived, he had less layers of immortality protecting him, and the pain was finally enough to cause him to pass out. In the end, what defeated him was his own arrogance, the fact he was certain that no one would figure out how to get past his protections, and that the only threats were from the powerful. Now he was defeated. I was relieved for a second until I heard movement behind me. I turned slowly and I saw what the Winterman's blood hit. Adansi sat up with blood on her face, and when I saw her gray eyes and spiderweb veins in her skin, my fists clenched, my heart jumped, and I saw red. Adansi is only given a single day each year to live as a human being. A single day to be human, to live, to be a child, not to be a goddess of Lockhart. However, because she only lived for a single day, that meant that she died at midnight. I had to trick the Winterman into the house with a dead child that no matter how meaningful I made her too few hours of life, it always feels like I could have done more, no matter how many times I tried. And the Necromancer, in his final waking moments, decided to turn her dead body against me. In my rage, I was too angry to speak as Adansi reached up with her hands as she leaned towards me, her hands reaching for my neck, and I was too angry to even recognize what she was now, let alone being able to say what she was out loud. Her fingers were curled into claws, her spidery veins spread out from her jaws, and her open mouth let out a long moan with her bacterial-filled blood pooling on her tongue. She was suffering, even after her death, and I was too angry to do anything about it as she took a hesitant step towards me. Fortunately, my friends came to my aid while I was lost in my rage at the necromancer's crime. The Red Prince stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder as she spoke. Her words echoed through the room, collapsing all of the undead and reducing them all to ash.
In Yahweh's eyes, you have earned your rest.
She said, as Adanse was reduced to ash in front of me, leaving nothing behind that I could bury. I would have to vacuum up her remains along with the remains of all the other undead the necromancer summoned. Although he still laid on the floor, another layer of immortality was gone, but still so many to go. While we processed what was happening, there was a knock on the door. Birthstone opened the door, and she let whoever was outside inside. Dia stood alongside Adanse. Dia quietly observed the body as they altered the sigil to open a path to a cell to keep the Necromancer, a place better equipped to keep the Necromancer. While that happened, Adanse started to speak to us, and I had a surreal moment of mourning the undead. Adanse, the human, died in my home, then was brought back to life as a sufferer of SAMD syndrome. Then she was reduced to ashes in front of me by the power of a goddess of death. I could smell her ash. I could taste it on my tongue, and her remains stained my hands and my clothes. And yet Adanse stood before me, the goddess, uncaring about her body and not caring about the fact that she was being mourned. She had a job to do, and I was not supposed to mourn her since she wasn't dead. Her body dies every year, so why does it hurt every time? Glad to see the Necromancer is captured. The warden in Black Moon Prison will be quite pleased. Our mission is not finished yet. We still have to take the Palace of Bone, Dauncey said, and everyone else nodded, while I looked down at my ash-covered hands. I was useful here because I was bait, and I knew about the summons and abilities of the Necromancer. I wasn't going to be useful in the attack. Before I had a chance to sit down and start cleaning the ashes, Adanse held my hand for a second. I appreciate what you did tonight, but we need you just a little longer. Can you please join us in the attack? She asked me, and I glanced around at the others, and they were all looking at me eagerly. I was being asked to help, but I didn't think I was that special of a person. No powers, no secret weapons, not even any interesting secrets. And yet the Marquess of Madness wanted to have me join her on an assault, the Palace of Bone. She asked me to join her, and all I could think about was to tell her yes, I would join. We exited the front door, which led to a place of frozen ice and with skies as dark as coal. And yet I was not cold, as we saw the many factories and the Palace of Bone in the middle of it all. We weren't alone, far from it. I could see thousands of people lined up to attack the Winterman's workshop. Some of them I recognized, others I did not. Some were from history, some were from possible futures, and most were from the present. I could see Birthstone glancing towards Adanse, full of questions, full of anger, and full of fear. She was exiled by Adanse once, and the two of them never spoke since then. Even when Adanse entered my home, she ignored Birthstone, refusing to look at or even say excuse me to Birthstone. I knew that broke Birthstone's heart, but that was something that was not my place to explain, let alone fix. Still, I could never imagine saying no to Adanse's request to join the attack on the workshop. Even as we discuss where to attack, where I'm looking over a map with the Killer of Kemet and the Witch Boy, Rosin Autumn Ashes acting as an interpreter for Asclepius, and sitting next to the actual explorer from all those centuries ago. I stood with legends, and they respected my input on the plans. However, even if I was just a foot soldier, I would have told Adanse yes. Wouldn't you have told your daughter yes if she asks you for help? The Necromancer has been defeated and he has been captured, held in a prison beyond any normal person's reach. Still, we have to take over and destroy his workshops and the Palace of Bone. The Necromancer's fortress near the planet's magnetic north pole, far beyond the northern vortex, an eternal storm beginning at 66 degrees north, and the workshop is even further north than the eternal storm. beyond the reach of even the most powerful armies and nations on the planet. The only reason so many of us had arrived here is because we have godly allies who were able to create and open paths, who took us beyond the edges of the northern vortex and into the eye of the storm where the Palace of Bone was built. We are fairly certain that the Necromancer didn't create the northern vortex, but he did take advantage of it by building his palace here, a towering palace of 7 towers that dwarf even the clouds of smoke above. Surrounding the palace were the factories. 12 massive brutalist structures that are the size of townships, with pipes, chimneys, sky bridges, and even machines that are hundreds of meters wide. Our camps surround the dark factories, our lights are fireflies before a behemoth of shadows. There are heroes from across time, at least one hunter from every hunter's guild, powerful monsters from all over the world and beyond, mercenaries being paid by wealthy patrons, soldiers being paid by their tax dollars, villains who agreed to fight because it was their world as well, people who didn't fit as hero, villain, nor neither. Then there were beings that didn't fit with neither person nor beast. Even with the size of our army, we were so few before the machinations of the Palace of Bone. Even with the Necromancer imprisoned, that did not mean that his evil was stopped. He still had prisoners in his palace, some alive, most dead. They deserved their freedom as well. And then there were the esoteric reasons for bringing the palace down, along with all of the factories. The Necromancer's power is great, but he could only carry so much of it with him at all times. He has to keep most of his power somewhere else. His collected knowledge, his minions, his raw material, his magic, and his treasures were all stored in the Palace of Bone and the factories. To explain it using an analogy, the Necromancer's power by himself was like a smartphone. It could store decent information and do a lot of useful tasks. However, it was limited in information, electricity, and even processing power. The palace was like a server farm. It stored so much information, electricity, and processing power that millions of phones could not equal it. Where the Necromancer was at this time, he could not access this power. However, having such power out there that he could reach if we lost our focus for even a few minutes, that wasn't safe. Not to mention the fact that leaving such a place of power in place, even if the Necromancer never escaped, someone or something else would find the Palace of Bone. It may take a very long time for them to use its power, but that is quite a bit of power, and an empty throne is a dangerous thing to have in this world. So it is here, in one of the tents, where I helped plan the assault. I helped advise the assault, using advanced technology that allowed me to connect in real time to captains leading the assault, where I could see what they can see, hear what they can hear, and even offer real-time advice. I am one of a dozen, each of whom leads hundreds, who in turn lead thousands. The assault has begun. My division has 3 battalions with 30 captains, and we focus on our factory. The factory was hundreds of stories tall with no doors and windows. Explosives were placed and a hole was blown, allowing our forces to flood inside. The first factory floor was a place of suffering. It was clear the Necromancer had started to automate some of his unholy harvest. The conveyor belts carried body parts from one end of the floor to the other. Automated arms, saws, and sewing machines assembled mismatched bodies from the flesh, and the body parts preserved by the freezing cold. Body parts that still squirmed from pain and fear as the bodies were assembled, their bodies rejecting each part, at war with itself, and the suffering made worse as they were assembled in full, and at the end of the assembly line, they began the process of disassembling the bodies. When fully assembled and in pain, before these poor flesh toys could adjust to their bodies and their existence, they were disassembled again. Their nerves were removed last. As they were disassembled, their removed body parts placed back on the piles to be assembled again. One of the most common sources for necromantic energy was suffering and pain. You can't get something for nothing. Something has to be given up. One person can only feel so much pain, though. If you take hundreds of them apart and put them back together and kept it going, that kind of energy will keep both of these machines going and keep the body parts living, even if there was no mind left. Already there was chatter among the soldiers as I called out to the Captain Phoenix Princess. I asked her to set the room on fire, which she did with eager ease. Machines and flesh both burned to ash in seconds, and the factory floor screeched to a halt as her men moved on to the next flesh toy floor. I wish there was something to save the body parts. However, they were created to suffer, and there wasn't really a way to stop the cycle. They are designed to suffer, and even if you stop their pain, that would only kill them. All I can do is hope that they appreciate what we did for them. On a different floor of the factory, toys were being built, and we found our first survivors. This squad was led by Captain Love, and she was a good choice for the floor, as we saw the children chained to the assembly line, as they assembled handheld game devices and other electronics. Their eyes were desperate, and it wasn't the children who were the threats, but those who oversaw them. They looked alive. They walked normally, and they were completely relaxed. It was their eyes that gave them away, a constant sense of relief that you could see at all times, the eyes of someone who was finally at peace. Even when they were bleeding and in pain, they were relieved just to be alive. The most loyal minions of the Necromancer, the possessed. Souls freed from pandemonium and placed into bodies that were not their own, forcing the bodies back to life. Free of the pain and agony of hell, they were all willing to follow the Necromancer's words to the ends of the earth and beyond. Because serving the Necromancer meant that it was time away from their judgment. Even a few seconds free of hell was enough to make them eager to follow every order, no matter how vile. They were hoping to serve entire lifetimes to the Necromancer, serving from body to body until their sentences finally ran out. They wouldn't just fight us, they would fight to the death, which is not easy to do, since the bodies are bound to the body, rather than biologically supported by the body. They did, however, have a major weakness, as they soon discovered, when they tried to aim their guns at Captain Love, only to find they couldn't pull the trigger. Captain Mercy Love, or the Devil's Daughter, could not be harmed by any denizen of Pandemonium. Demon, damned, devil, debutante, duke, duchess, defiler, or desecrator. It made no difference. The souls may be pulled out of hell by the necromancer's power, but that didn't mean that the devil's daughter was powerless here. She spoke a single word that echoed through the hall as every single possessed body that heard her word fell to the floor dead, and their souls returned to Pandemonium. Leave, Mercy said, through the floor as she and her soldiers quickly went to work, releasing children and bringing them back outside to where the children of Iphengia could care for the lost children, hopefully reuniting them with their families, and for the others who had no families, we can just do our best to find a home for them. I reminded Mercy to look out for other possessed who didn't hear her words, and just because they couldn't harm her didn't mean they couldn't harm the others. She affirmed she heard my call as I got a notification that Hush needed my help. I switched to her view. She was with both Birthstone, her partner, and with Azam the Mighty, Hush's ancestor. Both Hush and her ancestor were once dancers who became heroic and then gigantic, where it was being heroic that made them powerful. Being powerful didn't make them heroes. Birthstone was not as big as the other two, but she could change her size, which made her useful, as they made it into the throughway of the factory, smashing the massive machines that powered the factory and redirected pain, energy, smoke, blood, and flesh through the factory. The heart of the factory and the power source of the server, so to speak. Thankfully, it seems the Necromancer didn't bother with curses nor traps, which makes sense. They can be costly to maintain and can be used against you. And when you have so much time, they will stop working long before you need them. Still, though, it was odd there wasn't more security in the throughway of the factory. All of the fiends, possessed, and Draugen were easily crushed underfoot. At the end of the throughway, where the factory met the palace, there was a massive door made of steel. Not old steel and rust, either, unlike most of the machines of the factory. The steel was polished and it looked like it belonged to a bank vault designed by giants. It dwarfed even the 20-meter tall Hush. The mechanism was a simple turn dial, which Azam was spinning, massive chainmail glinting in the gaslights of the factory, while Hush was a bit more cautious. Can you translate this word over the door? He asked as I saw what she was talking about. A word written in Ademic, but it wasn't written to represent a word in the language, but it was phonetic, making it hard for me to make the connection to what it meant until I said the word out loud. Get tight, I told Hush, not immediately making the connection, but when I did, I warned Hush. Prepare for some big trouble just behind that door, I warned her, as she readied her trident and Azam was in her final spin of the door, massive crook and sword at the ready. What possible trouble could be behind that door? She asked me as I answered. Thankful for my years of study at Agamemnon's. Goliath was a get tight, I told her, as the door finally spun open, and behind the door was what the Necromancer created from Goliath's body. He was tall, at least 25 meters tall, so tall he had to duck beneath the door that he was guarding. He was barefoot on the frozen ground, which revealed that he did indeed have 6 fingers on both hands and 6 toes on both feet. His armor was steel plate and attached to his body by being screwed into his bone. His helmet covered the top of his head, with his eyes moved to his shoulders, peering forward through bloodshot eyes. His lower jaw had all of the flesh removed, metal plates and blades replacing teeth and skin. It opened unnaturally wide as he tried to scream, but no sound came out. His vocal cords cut. He lunged towards Azam, who raised her arm and let him bite down on her gauntlet. She dragged him along, but the bite pressure was so great it was already scratching and denting the armor on her near unbreakable plate. While Birthstone tried to pull Goliath off of her companion, and Hush hurriedly asked, "What is this, and how do we kill it?" She asked me, and I began to explain. Mechanical monstrosity. Most of his organs have been replaced by mechanical devices, and it keeps him in great pain, as his brain has electrical wire running through it, piloting his body. The more damage to his body, the more his body will be replaced by nanotechnology that acts like stem cells. The good news is it will take hours to replace any serious damage. The bad news is the machines will keep adapting even if it takes time. If you remove the heart, you can destroy the machine keeping him going. He won't start out too intelligent, but something you have to remember. Before I could finish, Goliath stopped trying to bite Azam as he lunged for Hush, and she let out a yelp as she fell back and launched Goliath into a support column. The factory ceiling shook, and Goliath stood to unsteady legs as he started bleeding from a wound on his back. Already it was being stitched by golden wires, which was quicker than I thought it would happen. I wanted to finish what I was telling her. However, the fight with Goliath definitely took priority. Any weaknesses? I left my sling at home, Hush quipped towards me, which drew a titter from both Azam and Birthstone. They would both be well aware of the story of Goliath, and, quite honestly, it was one of the few cultural references they were all going to get. Poor balance is likely still a weakness. Knock him down, damage him quicker than he can heal, then take out his heart. However, after you've done that, you need to be ready to keep fighting because Goliath has, before I could finish, he lunged again towards Birthstone, biting at her legs as she screamed and started kicking his head over and over as Azam and Hush targeted his chest. Sword and trident swinging and trying to break through the metal ribs to try and get to his heart as the wounds kept healing, and finally Azam swung her sword towards the giant's neck as the flesh was cut, and Birthstone's stomps finally broke through the metal, stress far better than the blade did. Despite being shorter than Hush, Birthstone was significantly heavier, so that meant that her stomps hit a lot harder than Hush's would have. With the head removed, the body stopped moving, but the wire still squirmed, and they still tried to connect the head and the body. Take the head away, maybe we can force it to try and heal from more than it can recover from, I said as Birthstone kicked the head across the throughway, almost half a kilometer away, as the wires kept trying to reach across and reconnect the body, now harmless, as it tried to heal, and finally they broke open the chest using the blades that revealed what was in Goliath's chest. His organs were replaced a long time ago. His torso was practically all mechanical, with wires tensing and relaxing as they replaced muscle. His stomach was glass and full of green acid that digested food for chemical energy. The lungs were completely gone, and the heart was made from golden gears that wires flowed out of. Hush stabbed her bone trident into the heart, and the heart broke, leaving the body still. Well, that wasn't too hard. So, you wanted to tell me something about Goliath? Was it a fun fact? Hush asked, and I answered, well, sort of. What I wanted to say was that Goliath had 3 sons and a brother, all of whom were just as large as him, I told her as she turned to the darkness of the doorway, where 4 more pairs of eyes could be seen. While they turned to face Goliath's family, I got a notification from Hamilcar. I have an incoming message. Do you have this without my help? I asked as the 4 giants lunged towards them. Azam cut 2 different giant heads off with a single stroke, while Birthstone held off the other 2 giants by hand. Don't worry, we got this. Get your goddamn teeth off of my motherfucking leg! Hush yelled, while a severed head, with a wire still connected to the heart, bit at her shoe, and she was busy trying to kick it away. Fortunately, mechanical monstrosities are not contagious. It takes weeks of work to build even one on a human scale. The Gittites likely took years, if not decades, to work on. So they were fine. Plus, knowing Hush swearing at her work while she was doing it was part of her fighting process. Hello, Hamilcar. How are things? I asked the gentleman mercenary, an exoteric mercenary from Kart Hadash, very well experienced and very dangerous. He was one of the only known exoteric mercenaries with confirmed exemy, esoteric, and enigmatic kills. He was also one of the most loyal men I have ever met. He negotiates contracts clearly, and he's willing to go through with his job to the best of his ability. He was a captain over a large group of mercenaries and exiles, so it was odd for him to call for assistance. We have a problem. We found a T-junction that leads to both the library and the treasure room, and, well, all of the mercenaries headed to the treasure room. I wanted to confirm how you wanted me to proceed. He asked me, and I checked the camera. And sure enough, I could see the choices, treasure room, and library. Don't bother with the treasure room, it's not your goal. Take yourself and the exiles to the library. The top priority is securing the books. They will be distributed to the docents of the halls of time. I told him, and he affirmed what I said, and he asked, what do you want me to do about the mercenaries who left for the treasure room? Should I send in a squad, or maybe just head after them myself after the library is secured? He asked me, and I responded, don't bother. They're already dead. It says on the door, this is not a place of honor in Endemic. We will be sending in the Star Sailor, Ares, and MSU cleanup teams there. The gold is highly radioactive and will slog off the flesh off your bones in minutes. I told him directly. He didn't even pause before he confirmed, and he made his way right to the library. I have seen many libraries in my life. You get to a certain degree of power and you start keeping books to reference all of the little things you need to keep track of, and to also keep track of your own history. There was knowledge in that library that was likely irreplaceable, that would give context and information on the Necromancer's whereabouts across the millennia. While there would be the cost of blood to access that information, the docents in the Hall of Time would share it freely while also keeping the dangers of the books contained. At least, that was the goal. When Hamilcar arrived at the library, instead of shelves full of books, they were all empty. Rows upon rows of empty bookshelves, all empty, without a single book on any of them. Even the pages that would have been running the library for the Necromancer were gone. They must have evacuated immediately when the attack began. But that's gonna be a headache later. But for now, destroy the shelves and move on. We have to make it to the palace proper. I said as the exiles and Hamilcar started destroying the shelves, and I quickly went over the cameras to see if anyone needed my help. The exiles were former helpers of the Necromancer, those who willingly sought him out for power or wisdom, and then they would disobey him, usually by refusing to kill someone. So they were exiled to the wastes where they created the elf villages throughout the northern vortex. A lot of them volunteered to help us in taking the Palace of Bone. We believe that there was a cure for their curse in the libraries of the Necromancer. But if there was no library, there was no cure. They would be stuck in the northern vortex until a cure was found or the curse was understood. Still, at least freedom from the shadow of the Necromancer was a start, and they knew we would try to help them. So that was a relief, although I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart, knowing that even by helping our allies and doing my very best, I still failed in doing what I promised them. And that was before the fact that the Necromancer's little helpers were free out in the world with his collection of books, his knowledge, his power, and his magic in their hands. Sure, we can disable the power and magic in the Palace of Bone, which helps the world immensely, but there would still be consequences from this night. And already I was plotting in the back of my mind what I would need to do to help track these books down. Having successfully checked everyone else's cameras, I checked in on Hush again. I came in at just the right moment with Hush lifting her trident over her head, and the last giant's heart was on the floor in a pile of broken golden wires as she let out a victorious yell. I am Hush Puppy, destroyer of evil, she said with the trident over her head. Take it easy, it was just a mechanical monstrosity. I told Hush, who glanced into the dark doorway leading to the palace. What is with you and making all of your monster names start with the same letter? She asked me, and I shrugged before I responded. I like alliteration, where possible. Besides, it wasn't like anyone else was naming most of these monsters, but it looks like the others have just about finished their factories too, so we should get ready to head into the palace itself. I told her as I checked in with the demolition crew as they laid out the charges. Charges that would only go off with the signal and only when everyone living had left the palace. It would render the machines irreparable and have the building collapsed with no surviving rooms, melting the ice enough to bury it under tons of ice that would be unsalvageable by even the most advanced technology available. It was tempting to leave some of it to be studied or even salvaged. However, it was decided by those in charge that with the exception of the books, that everything in the Palace of Bone was too dangerous to keep around, even for study. Even if we tried to repurpose the suffering or redirect the energy for other use, the temptation to create more of the energy would be there. It would be far too easy to use the power of suffering to power a country, and only then for the country to decide that suffering and pain was a small price to pay for energy. Plenty of countries were willing to sacrifice their populace, their future, and the future of the planet in pursuit of energy. A device that directly converts the suffering to energy. The Empire, the Seven Cities, the Middle Kingdom, and even Kart Kadash have already asked to get the plan so they could attach it to their hospitals and they could just organically gain energy from the patients. Again, the temptation was great. But Themis, the Titan of Justice and one of the leaders of this attack, refused. It may start by trying to benefit from it passively, and there would be people who would refuse to take it further, maybe even a large part of the government. But as long as there was a benefit to harming others, then there would always be a justification to causing that harm. It would be too easy to reduce anesthetic during a surgery to increase pain to try and get that ratio of pain to healing where there was enough pain without hurting the healing. And then there would be a need to increase the energy. There was always a need for growth, industry, capital, disaster, or even just simple greed. There would come a time when there was a need for more energy, so they would cause pain themselves. They may say it was just once or it's only temporary, but the need will only grow as they realize they can get more energy. The justification would get easier and more pain would be drawn. Anyone who objected would be moved elsewhere, or they would be persuaded that it was for the greater good, so that it meant that it was okay. It may seem impossible until you see the industries out there that thrive from causing pain and causing scarcity. There's so many people in them that convince themselves that it was for the greater good, that it was just how things were, and Themis decided that humanity wasn't in a place where it could gain energy from suffering, not without causing more suffering. And I agree with her. I have seen too much pain in the world, too many people who would have sacrificed others for their own benefit, and far too many who would have convinced themselves that their own pain is for the benefit of the world. If there was an actual machine that could turn pain into energy, there would be people eager to use that machine, and there would be people eager to be that source, as long as someone was telling them it was to benefit everyone else. I got a notification that the other factories were cleared and it was now time to enter the Palace of Bone. I directed Mercy Love to enter first, supported by Hush and Phoenix Princess. Inside the palace itself, we found entire walls full of nothing, frozen bodies. Bodies that were still conscious, but not alive. Phoenix princesses' power melted them from their prison and burned their bodies away, freeing their souls. I felt another twinge in my heart. These people were innocent, slaves of the Necromancer, frozen when he got bored of them, acting as batteries of suffering and energy that he could access, forced to obey him at any time. Only by melting the ice that replaced their bones could they be free. For a lot of them, it was a mercy freeing them from hell. For others, we must have seemed like monsters. We were monsters. Unable to undo the Necromancer's curse, all we could do was offer them death or leave them enslaved and frozen. We didn't even give them a chance to say what they wanted. The decision was made that it was better to free them for judgment. The orders weren't mine, and it wasn't me who set them ablaze. I even let Themis, Adansi, and Hades know my objections. They only agreed that I wouldn't be a part of the immolation. They would not agree to let them endure. In their eyes, death was a greater mercy, and giving them a choice was something that we could not offer, because we could not give them freedom. I changed the camera away from the flames that consumed over the frozen bodies, and those who worked on the Necromancer's experiments. Most of those who worked on the experiments stood still while the flames washed over them, ready for death or maybe not caring anymore. Others ran. The heroes refused to immolate those who ran. Our hearts could not bear it when there was no longer the benefit of the doubt. And that was where the villains shone, eager to chase them down and bring fire upon them. Their hearts unburdened and unburned as they laughed at those who tried to run or defend themselves. Another weight on my heart as I flipped through the cameras, hoping to look away. But even if I could find a single camera without flames visible, that did not mean that our crimes weren't happening, and that guilt would be there. It took hours for the last frozen body to be incinerated, but when we were certain, we moved on to the throne room in the center of the palace. This part I felt no guilt, and we were all united in the throne's destruction. The throne was esoteric in nature, but the most dangerous part of the throne wasn't the magic it held, but what the throne symbolized. Symbols have power. They can unite, they can destroy, they can inspire, they can dishearten, they can serve as focal points of power, and there are few symbols more dangerous than an empty throne. It means that it's a target someone will seek out that throne to keep it. Someone will seek out that power, someone who could be worse than the Necromancer. If we destroy the Necromancer's throne, then there would be nothing left for the Necromancer to build his kingdom around. Sure, we took him, we stripped his power, most of his loyal minions were dead, and the rest were gone. His palace would be shattered, and large parts of it were melted. Still, as long as the throne stood, there would be that hope that it could be rebuilt, and it is there that we have to destroy that hope. And even if we destroy the throne, that may not destroy the hope that the Necromancer would return. But it would be hell of a start of making the world a better place. The throne was unassuming, red velvet over a golden frame with sculpted skulls where the hands were made to rest. The room was empty save for the throne. The walls were ice, and above, the ceiling showed the night sky, letting a few snowflakes fall below. It was quick work destroying the throne. Phoenix Princess and Red Prince both focused elemental attacks. Fire and lightning danced along the throne, melting the gold, burning the velvet, and within minutes it was melted slag beneath the ice that thawed and refrozen over the throne, leaving nothing left of the throne and the necromancer's power was truly conquered. My heart did feel lighter as they left the palace of bone, and with the last of us free, we watched together as the palace and the factories fell. The explosion could be heard for kilometers as the leftover ruins melted the ice, falling deeper and deeper into the ice, beyond even our sight, as the seawater froze again, leaving only the crater itself and the smoke clouds above as evidence that the necromancer was ever here. And even then, the clouds above were starting to clear. It would take a long time for the smoke to clear, and even longer for the last traces of esoteric corruption to dissipate. Still, the process for healing could begin. While that part was done, we had to deal with the other consequences of what removing the Winterman from the world was going to do. The Necromancer was evil, he was cruel, he was darkness etched into the history of the planet. It would not take long for many ambitious, evil people to fill the void that he left behind. What was a harder role to fill was his role as the Winterman, the gift giver who visited the world during the winter, giving gifts. To leave a role like that empty would have harsh consequences since many people did come to expect the Winterman's gifts, especially those who never paid his price. Thankfully, we had a few different people who were willing to fill in his role as the Winterman. Granny Grayla and all of her children were willing to help. Krampus was willing to punish the troublemakers. Many witches were eager to meet the children and show them the joy of magic. Mary Lloyd and her helpers also were willing. And finally, there was the old immortal, the man who escaped Lady Bathory and who sought out his own redemption for the evil he had done across the centuries in her name. One of the last of his kind, and he was eager to bring joy the world over. And by being immortal, he may serve this role temporarily, or he may serve it truly forever. Nicholas would lead the Exiled Elves in bringing joy to the world, even if the elves were unable to leave the Northern Vortex. He would give them some control over their lives back, and he would seek out a cure for their curse. So, at least as far as the role the Winterman serves in winter, would be covered by Nicholas the Halcyon, Granny Grayla, Krampus, Mary Lloyd, countless elves, witches, and little miracles that would bring joy the world over. Something that certainly lightened a lot of hearts, but I would still have one final task to do, a failure I would have to explain. I returned to Samantha Williams' house in Swamp City. Dawn has arrived in Swamp City, but it is 3 hours away in National City. Adansi awaits for me outside. As a goddess, she knows why what I have to say is important. As my daughter, she hates to see me so sad, so she waits for me outside. I knock on the door, and I am let inside Samantha's house by Samantha's nurse, working even on Christmas Day. Samantha is lying on a bed full of tubes and wires, unable to speak. Death would be coming for her soon, but thankfully death is waiting for Samantha to see her son again. Instead of seeing her son for one last time, I only have news of his death. I apologize to her, and I tell her that every one of the frozen fiends were incinerated to free their souls. We have no way of knowing which was her son, let alone which ashes were his. All of the ashes looked the same and mixed with the ice in the same way. Even being unable to speak, I could tell Samantha was angry at me, with her heart rate monitor beeping faster. I let her feel her anger as I continued my apology. I tell her I am sorry we could not return her son to her, and that she couldn't say goodbye to him. I reassured her that we freed his soul and that she would see him in the sunless lands. Hades promised to let all of the passed on souls the chance to speak to their loved ones, regardless of their judgment. Still, this did not sate her anger. The beeping only got faster as tears fell from my face, and I apologized again. I did so much right. I helped free thousands. I freed the world from the shadow of the Necromancer, and my efforts would bring joy to billions, possibly for the rest of eternity. But in that moment, I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a success. I was just someone who made a promise to give a mother a final chance with her son. I wouldn't have been able to find the Necromancer without her help, and all she wanted in exchange for that information was a chance to say goodbye. I did everything I could, and it wasn't enough to keep my promise. All I could do was sit with her, reassure her that her son was free. I waited until the beeping changed tone and the nurse ran into Samantha's room, trying to restart her heart. I left the house, staring forward at nothing, not feeling the cold air, nor feeling any joy nor victory in what I had done. I made a promise, and even if I made the world a better place, I still broke that promise, and I wasn't going to let it go easily. Ndaya sat across from me, and Adansi sat next to me. The silence said a lot. I know that there was a lot I did that was right. The world is better because of it, but my nature as a journalist means I need to record it all, both good and bad, so that the stories are accurate. We made it home to National City where I met the rest of my family, and we had so many smiles and joy shared. Even if it wasn't perfect, even when I sometimes forgot how to smile, even if the sadness felt like it was too much, I took a breath and I moved forward with my moment, happy to spend time with my family. I lived. Many people weren't so lucky, and as much joy that I felt that day, I know that joy will continue and that others will feel it as well. By the time the sun set on Christmas, my heart felt lighter. Guilt was still there, the pain was still there, but knowing that I helped make the world better made it easier to bear. I have a lot of work for the next year, many stories to tell, but for this moment and tonight, I will rest knowing I did good. Even if I rest on easy, at least I can rest.